talking about your background and your achievements working at the Parliamentary Digital Service. Obviously, you've just been explaining to me that you worked your way into a position of authority, very well respected as a technology innovator in that environment. Obviously, as you might just outline to me, you made some significant inroads in building technology platforms for the last election in 2019. What you said was a highlight of your career, but then all of a sudden, in 2020, just a few months later, we know the steam train that was coming down the tracks. You were working in that digital parliamentary world. COVID happened. We heard about it in China first. Give us a sense of what happened in that moment for you and what you were asked to deliver.
Yeah, so it feels like for another lifetime, doesn't it? But I remember, as the fear factor of the pandemic coming, I think Italy had kind of locked down, and everyone suddenly realised it was going to hit us here. And I remember being called into the clerk of the House of Commons office, virtually, of course, and talking about what are we going to do. This is clearly going to end up in a point where the Commons is going to need to have contingency plans for how it operates. It doesn't really have them beyond a different physical location. They've got a lot of contingency plans around all kinds of things, but they all involved physically still being somewhere. What are we going to do? And so at this point, it was very much an administration issue. It wasn't something for MPs and things to worry about yet. It was the administration being prepared. We weren't at that point of lockdowns and things, but it was, what do we do? So I went away and had some thoughts to think of it again in my dusty old war chest, as it were, of things that I've thought about over the years. I've been working for a long time on a strategy about how we were going to build out our digital roadmap for how we were improving and innovating the various systems and applications that went into the running of Parliament, of which there are many, and there's lots of super smart clerks and administrative staff behind the scenes making it all happen. But we've done a lot of work over the last few years to digitize a lot of that. Lots of things now being done on iPads that used to be done handwritten or in Word. Lots of reduction of rekeying of information and creating portals that MPs could log on to initially, because it's the most important thing to find out what was for lunch. But that was the way of building the adoption curve. We had some of that. That had been happening for some time. So to me, it was like, what do we do now? And the two main problems Parliament faced were how are MPs going to ask their questions? That's one of the core things that they do, holding the government to account, and how they're going to vote, because that's how all laws are made. And at that time, obviously, the spotlight on how laws were made and how that would work was going to be intense. So I went away and had some thoughts about it and put together a little presentation, was saying, there are multiple things we can do. Voting being the main one. We can look at how we're going to allow MPs to table their questions from a remote location. There are things we can do around how they might register their interests, their financial interests. They can't come in and explain, that kind of stuff, and several others as well. But the two key ones were around the remote Parliament, how they're going to vote, how they're going to ask their questions. Discuss it with the clerk, and he said basically, go away and start doing something, because nothing's definite yet, but the window is, if it happens, it's going to be a very small window. So I'm trying to give you a bit of time, 4 whole weeks, I think it's what it turned out to be, to go away and do something. So off I went with my team. I took kind of a core group away from what they had been working on, because obviously there was lots of stuff going on anyway, and started thinking about how might we do this. Probably about a week or so into this, it's when the lockdowns hit, and then we had the double win of everybody being out of the office into working from home, which we'll all remember as chaotic times anyway, plus the high pressure then of knowing that by the end of April, which is when the House would have come back, they needed to be able to operate in a remote fashion. Otherwise, one would assume some kind of emergency government powers would have been needed to keep operating. Goodness knows how that would have worked. That was a dark scenario that nobody wanted. I don't know what we'd have done. So we carried on building out the remote voting and the remote application. Now, while that was going on, obviously my devs were working really hard. They were building it out, we were testing it, we were testing through lots of things. I spent quite a lot of time then having to speak to the MPs, because they have to agree to do this. The MPs run their own, basically the Commons is a little business where the MPs decide how it works. The government don't decide, the Speaker doesn't decide, the House decides how the House will operate. So there's a lot of time. So first it was speaking with the Speaker of the House, it was speaking to senior ministers and the Chief Whip, I remember, and the Leader of the House at the time, and then talking to the parliamentary the committee that procedure committee, there we go, forgotten its name, that decides how things work. And it was presenting the solution. This is what we want to do. This is how it will work, and answering lots of questions around, very deep parliamentary procedural things. Very fortunate to have kind of the principal clerk of that area to answer all of those things, because it's deep, and it's obviously based on hundreds of years of ways of working. So we lots of time spent practicing understanding how it's going to work, taking on board some of their feedback, because some of it did make sense, and then some areas, of course, pushing back on, well, no, we have to do it in a certain way. Can I use my own login? No, you've got to use the parliamentary login because that's the secure one, and we can't take any chances with this. Building all that through, spending some time with the National Cybersecurity Centre, getting them to vet it and just make sure, assure it was secure, and there was no risks of attacks from any. You can imagine many people will be interested in having a pop at the parliamentary voting system, trying to take it down. And one of the nice things was, because of how our voting works, it's not secret, so you couldn't really, nothing could be manipulated, even in the worst case scenario, but it would be embarrassing. We were very keen to avoid anything like that, so we did a vetting of the cybersecurity. Then took it out for a trial run, which we ran a trial run with I think the vote was something like that. The House agrees that jam goes on top of the scone first, and it was a yes or no. So we were completely uncontentious politically, and we ran a complete trial. So people got we ran it internally first, and it worked fine. Did a second trial with some MPs who signed up to our kind of test group, and it was a disaster. It didn't work, and there were lots of issues, and there were obviously immediate lots of grumblings and panic. And I remember being interviewed by Wired magazine, who had asked about the glitchy birth of this app, what is going on. And again, I'm explaining to them that actually I'm pretty glad, because I'd rather it went wrong now. We're building a system. Of course it's not going to work. Of course something's going to go wrong. But this is a group of people that talk to the public for a living, and of course they've all got agendas, and they've all got different ways of thinking, and it came across there was a big disaster. It turned out it was because it was too secure, as I remember now, that our system, basically, if you were inside the parliamentary estate, you were fine, you could vote. If you were voting on your own personal Wi-Fi, wouldn't let you do it. So we'd over secured it, so we had to do a bit of work to improve that and make it work for all. Ran several more trials. They all worked much more successfully. I remember engaging with many MPs late at night on Teams, asking, is this working? Is it not? What's going on? Let's test it. Let's reach out, and getting them, just sitting down with them, just to go through one-on-one, what were they doing from a trial. And then we went through the process of rolling it out, which was, I remember running workshops in Teams where people could drop in, and just we would across my team, and we were very fortunate with the fact that we had a big group of visitor assistants in Parliament, as you can remember. You go in, get on a guided tour, someone takes you around. They obviously didn't have anything to do, and they were able to help us do a lot of work around testing things. They were able to help talk to people about how things worked, and so we had like a big army of volunteers to help us. And we did these drop-in centres where MPs, like some really senior, well-known people, and more backbench people that you wouldn't have heard of, dropping in on these calls, and it's the most surreal experience possible in their homes, and you're talking them through how they set it up on their phone, how they install the app, how they log in, we run a test vote. Really bizarre. And yeah, then it came to rolling out live. They had their first division late April, early May, a nice simple test in the House to start with, and it worked really smoothly and went from there. And again, I think I remember another one of the big things people worried about is there's a bell that rings in Parliament when there's a vote, and it's a little ding 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 that goes off, and it sounds through all the TV screens. It sounds around the estate. It used to sound in local pubs and bars, obviously not so much nowadays. But people were concerned about the timeliness of the doorkeeper pressing the button to say here's a division, and the bell and the app sending out notifications. And it turned out when we were doing it that because of like delays in TV feeds and things, our bell was ringing a second before it would show on television, and people were thinking that something was going on, and we were cheating the world, and we're jumping ahead, but it was literally just like a video delay. So we were just slightly ahead of the curve. But once people got used to that, it was fine. Yeah, and they ran it throughout the pandemic. We did the same thing for the House of Lords, who ran it for a lot longer, because the MPs, you may remember, came back relatively quickly, much like many other workplaces did. But the Lords, because it's got a different demographic, they stayed remote for quite a lot longer, and I think they ran it for at least a year on the Lords side. And yeah, it was a really impactful piece of work.
And that's what you got the OBE format. That sort of incredible innovation. I can only imagine the pressure that you were under to deliver that. We talk about this in normal everyday life in terms of the kind of the investors or the stakeholders of the board, but when you're talking about fundamentally a situation that might stop laws from being passed, decisions from being made, probably one of the most important times in history. How did you deal with that pressure and stress? Because that must have been immense.
At the time, I think it was just a massive adrenaline rush, and I didn't feel it. When I look back, I know, because I remember, and it's the thing I remember talking about. I remember I worked 58 days straight without a day off, like all through weekends. Slightly, maybe only 6 or 7 hours on the weekend, but there were long days in the week. I remember it was 58 days, and at the end of it, I was burned out. But I don't think I realized at the time, because the buzz carried you, because you knew it mattered. The team we were a team. I wasn't doing it on my own. We're doing it as a group. We were all behind it, and you knew it was really important. And to be fair to everybody involved, and passing all the politics side of it from now, largely as a whole, the group of MPs we were working with, no supporters, they were all very, very supportive, even those who I know for a fact didn't like the idea of it because it went against tradition. And that's okay, because that's a big thing for our parliament. It's a very traditional place. But nobody was trying to derail it. People were all on side, and kind of like for the first time in my whole career, probably, everybody involved wanted to see it work. And that made a big difference. So people were supporting, and people would take things away from you. You didn't have to worry. This was the only thing to focus on. But at the same time, you can't do that amount of work without really hurting yourself. And I think once it was done, I was probably done as well. And that's kind of one I thought one of the many things that factored into my moving on at the end of that year, because I was just done, and I needed to be somewhere else doing something else